Oh hey everyone, Metal Levi Alex back with my next review for the night for well Venom, the new kinda sorta but not really uh the Spider-Man movie without Spider-Man in it. Yeah, it's a bit confusing like that. So this movie's been promoted and for like Lord knows how many years. And yeah, for those who know me, you'll likely know Venom is my favorite Spider-Man villain of all time. I like the concept. I like how he looks. Just a lot of things about Venom I just enjoy immensely in concept and as a character. And this movie, for all intents and purposes, tried to tried to popularize on that with the whole superhero boom that we have. So yeah, Venom we've had one other time on movies, which was the third and last of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, Spider-Man 3. And yeah, I hated that movie. In all honesty, I thought it was a complete mess that just did not know what it wanted to be, and Venom being in there just felt like a complete afterthought. And you can blame a producer by the name of Avi Arad for shoehorning him in there when Sam Raimi did not want him in there. And of course, the whole Topher Grace version of Eddie Brock, which nobody in their right mind likes. I certainly did not like him. And yeah, fast forward to now, and we have a Venom solo movie. Yay. So, yeah, from the very get go, I personally was not excited for this movie when it was first announced because Venom, in his concept and character, starts with Spider-Man. The alien symbiote attached to Peter Parker. It tried to take over him, and Spider-Man rejected it. It found its way into Eddie Brock. The rest is history. And the movie tried to basically skips over everything Spider-Man related and starts with its own, I guess you could say, kind of sort of own origin story with Eddie Brock. And throughout the making of the movie, they pretty much promoted it as being an adaptation, or rather a loose adaptation, of the Lethal Protector storyline from the comic books by David Michelini. And yeah, I wouldn't even call it an adaptation or even a loose one, because honestly, this movie has no story similarities with the actual Lethal Protector comic book, other than names and some Venom comic trivia referenced here and there. So the movie pretty much starts with, you know, Eddie Brock. It is, he's a reporter with his own little segment for a news network who's going around basically being, I guess you could say, like Alex Jones, asking all the tough questions and being his own funny man, more or less. And yeah, and of course you have the whole shtick with Carlton Drake, who's I'll get to in a minute. And it goes wrong. He loses. He gets fired. He loses his girlfriend and all that. And he ends up getting mixed up with, with the stuff regarding the symbiotes, which crash landed in a space shuttle when they that were recovered. And Carlton Drake's messing up, who's played by Riz Ahmed, who's messing around with the symbiotes. One of the lost symbiotes from the crash finds its way to Eddie Brock, played by Tom Hardy, and you have a mishmash alien symbiotic kind of mess of a movie that's honestly, it was a lot more fun than I thought it would be. So, yeah, you have all that. You have um, Michelle Williams as Anne Weying, who's the girlfriend, kind of caught in the middle, and a couple of other characters here and there. You have Eddie Brock having been bonded to the Venom symbiote, which is, of course, talking to him in his head, and a lot of comic book hijinks ensue, which, of course, lead to eventually to a big battle at the end, and so on and so forth. It's honestly kind of hard to judge. So that's the overall underlying plot of the movie. First off, let me get the how should I how sh- yeah. Pardon the lack of structure in this movie, because honestly, that's kind of how I feel after watching this. Because honestly, this movie left me very confused. Not confused in the way that I thought the movie was confusing, just that it has a lot of feelings tugging at me that leave me personally confused on how I personally feel about the movie. On one hand, I should hate this movie by default because it completely skips over the Spider-Man parts of Venom's character and story arc, and just starts fresh with its own thing and shit. And it's just by that being a fan of the character and knowing his backstory, it leaves me very conflicted. But on the other hand, the movie throws in a bunch of legitimately fun and funny moments and scenes that I kinda actually surprisingly enjoyed it. Now, let me give y'all a bit of a backstory as to why Venom is my personal favorite character, or rather the Eddie Brock host Venom, I should say. In the comic books, Venom was, like I said, he was a reporter. He worked for not the Daily Bugle that Peter Parker worked in, but another one called the Daily Globe. And he had a scoop that involved an interview with a supervillain named the Sin Eater. And he got it and Brock's publishers basically rushed out the story without double checking anything, and before Brock knew it, his story was up, and next thing he knew, Spider-Man caught the real Sin Eater, the one he had interviewed being an imposter. Brock was fired. His wife and just like in the movie, divorced him, and his abusive father disowned him, and yeah, he pretty much he lost everything. He lost his job and everything. And eventually he took up work. He took up, being fit, weightlifting and all of that. And just when he was feeling better about himself, he ended up he ended up getting cancer. And that just ruined his life even more. Just when he was starting to feel better about himself again. And then eventually, and of course, by this point, Spider-Man has the black suit, and it's taking over him and making him more violent. And Spider-Man, of course, went to go and remove the symbiote at a church where a loud bell, because the symbiotes don't like extremely loud noises, it's their weakness, along with fire, where he went to go remove it. However, as fate would have it, at the same time, Eddie Brock had gone over to that same church to beg God for forgiveness and was actually contemplating suicide by that point. Spider-Man, of course, removed the Venom symbiote, and then the Venom symbiote found Eddie, and latched onto him, and they both more or less became compatible with their shared hatred for Spider-Man. The symbiote not liking how it was rejected by Peter Parker, and Eddie Brock, who hated Spider-Man as a coping mechanism for how screwed up his life had gone. And of course, the rest is history. Venom and Eddie Brock became one of Spider-Man's deadliest nemesis. And because the symbiote was attached to Spider-Man, it was able to copy and mimic Spider-Man's powers, from the web slinging to everything else, and even blocking the spider sense. And since it shared a body and mind, it knew all of Peter Parker's secrets. So, and couple that with a person who had to, I guess, to a misguided sense, also hated Spider-Man for reasons that you could buy as, albeit warranted, if a bit misguided, and you have yourself a perfect villain right there. A villain that pretty much knows all of Spider-Man's deep, dark secrets and has ways of getting around him. Couple that with the overall monstrous look with the jet black, blue tinted suit, the teeth and the eyes. You had yourself a cool looking villain right there, as well as one of the best backstory characters right there. A tragic villain, more or less. And of course, over the years, Eddie Brock and Venom, the symbiote, they eventually grew tired of fighting Spider-Man many times, and they eventually, as in the Lethal Protector comic book, they went to San Francisco, and it's there that they got into conflict with the Life Foundation, where they ended up spawning a bunch of Venom symbiotes, child spawns, like Carnage, how he's a spawn of Venom. Well, in that story, they captured Venom and they forced him to reproduce the symbiote, I mean. And it was you had Venom, Spider-Man even got involved, and you had a whole big battle against Carlton Drake and 5 reproduced symbiotes, one of which is the villain in this movie named Riot, who's also bonds eventually with the Riz's version of Carlton Drake. And that's pretty much the overall setup to Venom, the character, how he's more or less in an abridged sense evolved from villain to anti-hero, and where, of course, that led to that comic book, and the rest is history. However, of course, there you can tell the obvious as to why I had a lot of reasons to not like Venom when it was announced to be a film that Avi Arad, Amy Pascal, and the other dunderheads in Sony were pushing forward, because it's like Batman without Joker. It's like the Joker without Batman. You just can't do it. You know what I mean? So when they did, over the months, I pretty much dreaded this film coming out, and yeah, for the most part, because of the very obvious Spider-Man omission, it practically has no reason to exist. But at the same and there's some things about it that I don't like. Again, besides the obvious Spider-Man omission, there's some silly editing moments here and there. It's very obvious this movie was supposed to be rated R at one point, because there's obvious kills and deaths in this movie that should have had a lot of blood and gore and all that. And there's some bits in the plot that they bring up here and there that are never brought up ever again. And the villain, of course, is, well, let's just say the villain in this movie is pretty terrible. Carlton Drake is a mustache twirly villain with no character or charisma whatsoever. He's as generic as roast beef. I'm just saying. Then again, Carlton Drake in the comic book was not really complex either. He was pretty much simple too, so I guess you didn't gain or lose much in the villain department. It's only when the Riot symbiote comes on that he's made a little bit better, but beyond that, well, then again, the Riot symbiote barely had any character in the comic book too, so I guess it's a slight positive, I suppose. And of course, there was a good 40 or so minutes cut from the film that Tom Hardy said were his favorite parts in the movie. So until we get an extended cut or something like that, Lord knows what will happen. And then at the end, of course, yet they had a post-credit scene, which of course revealed and finally confirmed what many have suspected of Woody Harrelson being Cletus Cassie. So since the movie did well financially, we're likely gonna see a second Venom movie that will, I guess, in some way adapt the Carnage storylines. Which one? A lot of people say Maximum Carnage, but I don't know. And yeah, the food for thought, Sony. Please have Woody Harrelson ditch that awful, awful red wig. It's about as terrible as the Titans TV version of Starfire. I'm just saying. So yeah, the movie has some messy shots. Another thing I didn't like was the music in this movie is very, very overbearingly loud. I like the music. It's fine. It's just too loud. I went with my friend, my buddy of the family, Ken, and there were times where he could barely understand any of the dialogue because it was so overbearing. To the hell, even my ears felt like they were gonna burst by the time the credits were finished. And so yeah, that's and as far as major negatives concerned, as well as the said plot moments that I felt were unfinished and just thrown away, I'll get to those in a minute. What did I like about this movie? For the most part, I really liked Venom the symbiote and even Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock. I like their dynamic in this movie. They are actually pretty. It was all actually pretty damn funny to me. Like there were a lot of moments where I actually just surprisingly forgot about why I dreaded this movie and just actually had fun with it. And coming from me, that is saying something. Oh, yeah, and when Venom, it takes a long time for Venom to actually, show up for about an hour. But when it does, it's pretty fun and exhilarating. The whole dynamic and the comedy between Brock and the symbiote is the best part of the movie. And I would watch it again just for that alone. They were very enjoyable. Tom Hardy, he did well too, despite everything. I personally think that his character, in terms of motivation, all that, is kind of floundery because without Spider-Man and the reason for why he became Venom in the first place is kind of lost. Also, bit of a factor with the Venom in the comic books and the other shows was not named Venom from the get-go initially. They took the name as a means of describing how, after they lost their initial job from Spider-Man capturing the real Sin Eater character, they ended up being forced to write, tabloids and other horrible crap that Eddie did not enjoy. So, and because of that, so it was like a double reference for Eddie Brock having to been resorting to writing poison, and also that he and the symbiote would become poison to Peter Parker and Spider-Man. So yeah, as a fan, it is, if you're a fan like me, it's pretty easy to get distracted by this movie from time to time and unfortunately remind myself why I ultimately dreaded it, but at the same time, I'm not gonna lie, I did actually have fun with it. There's also a lot of cool, nice references sprinkled here. The Daily Globe is mentioned in how Eddie Brock actually used to live in New York, but due to an incident that they don't detail but mention how he's and his ex and fiance, they eventually become exes in this movie. How they left to San Francisco for work there. And there is a pretty amusing moment where Anne gets possessed by the Venom symbiote, and for a brief moment is she Venom. they found a way to put She-Venom in this movie, and I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty funny. And Venom himself, yeah, the CGI is hit or miss, honestly, but when Venom's on screen, he looks the part. He looks and acts like the character with all the goofball, corny jokes, with the terrible visage that I come to expect from the character. And I'm not gonna, and again, enjoyable. Do I think that they can do more with this version of Venom? Maybe, but again, but the lack of Spider-Man is like the wound that still festers in there. It's a movie that confuses the hell out of me. Like, I want so desperately to hate it, but because of there's so many things that hold it back. But at the same time, I kind of like it too, because there's a lot of Venom-ish things in there and other things that just made me actually kind of enjoy it. I mean, the most critics certainly don't like it. The fan base is very divided on it. So yeah, I'm very internally divided on it. So yeah, it's kind of it's hard for me to honestly both recommend it and shun it, because it does things I like and yet has no reason to exist at all. Oh, and as for the plot moments that I felt were that I said were dropped, there's one moment where, you know, they're scanning Eddie's body for the symbiote, and Anne and her new boyfriend later in the movie are like, who's a doctor, is like, the symbiote's killing him, but the symbiote's telling Eddie that it's not killing him. Again, if I picked up on that Eddie Brock probably has cancer, and the symbiote is suppressing it, and because he's bonded to it and suppressing it, maybe they're getting the symbiote confused with the cancer. Again, if you're a fan, you'll likely catch up on that. I certainly did, but they never follow up on that ever again. So it's kind of distracting, honestly. There's another thing that bothered me was they changed how the symbiotes behave in this movie. In the comics and shows, they bond to hosts, right? And in this movie, they apparently put in a thing where apparently the symbiotes only like to be bonded to certain compatible hosts. Because if they are not on a compatible host, they kill the person who is the current host, or instead of just flatly rejecting and coming off of them. And it does not follow this rule at all. If anything, it's mentioned, used when the plot demands of it, and is never used ever again. Like, the Riot symbiote hops from person to person throughout the movie, eventually getting to Carlton, and somehow nobody dies. The Venom symbiote even bonds to a dog at one point to get back to him, and then jumps to Anne, who of course goes on to Eddie, and Anne's perfectly fine by the end of the movie. So it's like they invented one thing and yet completely ignored it. They bring up one too many things to that honestly are acknowledged but are never brought up ever again, leaving you wondering what are they doing, and whether or not they'll answer that for a sequel. There was one other thing. What was it? Oh yeah, another thing I didn't like. I did not like the motivation for Carlton Drake being the global warming will kill us in one generation. Millions will die. Yeah, Hollywood, can we stop using that tired plot? Please? Your Algorian, your constantly disproven Algorian nonsense is not happening. Or will ever happen. Not in this movie, not in Predator, not in real life. Yes, climate change is real. The planet is always going to shift, but the version of climate change you keep pushing has gotten so overblown and boring and uninteresting. I don't care for it anymore. You could have thought of any other reason for why Drake does what he does. Hell, I would have just taken. I would have been fine with normal take over the world because aliens bullshit. I would have been fine with that. And but despite that, the plot is for the most part relatively simple, despite my gripes with stuff that's brought up and never acknowledged again. And it doesn't overly overblow and try to pat itself out in the way that Predator did. Predator 4, the first movie I reviewed. The new Predator movie just overcomplicated so many things that did not need to be complicated and just basically ruined the Predator lore and mythology for until whoever gets the director's job for the next movie hopefully erases all of that bull crap. This movie just took a simpler approach of, aliens bonding to people and of course trying to take over the world, and the Venom symbiote, for whatever reason, just saying, screw all of that, I like it here, and I want to be on Earth with Eddie now. And it doesn't overcomplicate itself that much, thankfully, unlike that movie. In a way, it's the anti-Predator 4. In that, yeah, it's a messy film, but I honestly enjoyed it way more because of that. So, yeah, what else? Yeah, Venom, the symbiote was fine. I honestly could tell that there were people in the writing and directing and in the acting jobs that honestly did do what they could with the material they had for the Venom movie, because Tom Hardy clearly was having a ball with it. The guy voicing Venom was having a ball with it. Even Michelle Williams, I thought, was pretty enjoyable in the movie, and even the Riot symbiote, I thought, was pretty cool. The fight with him and Venom, and there was, I could tell to some extent, some passion behind the movie. Can't say the same for Avi Arad and Amy Pascal, though, because they've been forcing this bullshit on us since day one. Like, if I wanted a Venom movie, I would have preferred it after Spider-Man. If they had waited perhaps a couple of years to do Infinity War and the Part 2 movie that's supposed to come out next year with Spider-Man in space, maybe the symbiote bonds to him out in space or something to that extent, and then did a Venom Spider-Man movie and then carried on into this one, I would have been perfectly fine with it. But as it stands in this reality, they didn't. They rushed it, and we're stuck with this version for the time being. So Lord knows if we ever do get a proper Spider-Man Venom movie. And if we do, I honestly hope they managed to rope in Tom Hardy and the guy who voices the symbiote in this movie, because I thought they did a great job. It's just unfortunate that there's so much shit surrounding this movie that just holds it back in its reason to exist, among other reasons. And overall, is Venom Terabad like a lot of the critics say? In my personal opinion, not really. It's not great either. It's a symbiotic, confused mess of a movie that is floundering somewhere in a heap in a mess that just, in a heap of, I don't know, of Sony's incompetence, and is trying desperately to be something. But was it a fun, enjoyable, confused mess of a movie? Surprisingly, yes. I'm not saying go out and watch it right now or anything. If anything, if you want, go and check it out. But temper your expectations for anything masterpiece worthy, because this is not one of those movies. If anything, it's more like a 90s superhero movie made for the present day, like Spawn was, only with slightly better special effects for the most part. So, yeah, Venom, not how I would have done it by any stretch, but I'd be lying on it if I didn't say I didn't have fun with it. And if you're a fan of the character like I am, you'll probably enjoy it like I did, but at the same time, you will probably be very distracted by the whole omission of Spider-Man and why the character exists in this without him. And yeah, as for the sequel that they'll probably do with Carnage, screw it, I might see it depending on if Sony plays their cards right. Although I still say that Sony has not known what they've wanted to do for years now. So overall, enjoyed it. Not great, not terrible, but it is what it is. And for what it's worth, I can honestly say I had fun with it, and I can look back on it and still have a chuckle now and then. Unlike Predator 4, which just gets worse and worse all the time, and I honestly was way too kind in my review for that movie. So, I guess that's it. I'm gonna go, go put this back in my shelf and go back to continuing the game streaming, and tell me in the comments what you thought of this movie if you've seen it. I look forward to, I appreciate whatever thoughts any of you may have, and I'll see y'all later. Till next one. Peace out, y'all.